The public fixation on nuclear exchange, amplified by reports of purged Chinese generals leaking secrets, is a strategic misdirection. The calculus of mutually assured destruction makes a full-scale launch a low-probability, high-consequence event. The real vector of modern state conflict is not the kinetic shock of a missile. It is the systemic paralysis of absolute silence. Analysts at RUSI confirm that over 97% of global communications and trillions in daily financial transactions transit through a few hundred undersea fiber optic cables. This is the central nervous system of the global economy. For a state perceiving a loss of conventional leverage, whether from internal purges, exposing nuclear vulnerabilities, as reports from China suggest, or a looming solvency crisis, as indicated by Japan's currency intervention warnings, the severing of these cables is not an act of war. It is an act of economic conversion. This is the protocol for creating a blind leviathan. An adversary is not destroyed, but deafened and blinded. Its satellites are dazzled, its data flow ciphered, its financial system frozen. A superpower stripped of its senses becomes an existential liability. It is a cornered, uncoordinated Goliath, mathematically driven to escalate asymmetrically because it can no longer trust its own information. The systemic fragility demonstrated by states from Lebanon to China is not a sign of collapse. It is the charge being set for a silent, calculated attack on the global grid. The motive for escalation is not strength. It is a specific type of bankruptcy. We will call it a solvency crisis. A state's balance sheet has two columns, conventional power and political stability. When the stability column trends towards zero, the state does not passively collapse. It initiates a radical, forced conversion of assets. Consider the Russian Federation. The initial conventional phase of the war was miscalculated. Analysis from strategic bodies like RUSI and CSIS, echoing earlier Forbes assessments, identified the protracted conflict as a significant domestic liability. An unpopular war drains political capital at an unsustainable rate, creating a solvency crisis for the regime itself. This is the trigger. Faced with a terminal domestic equation, the protocol shifts. The objective is no longer to win the war conventionally, but to convert the war from a localized military problem into a global systemic risk. The state must make its internal crisis an external one. This is the pivot to asymmetry. Weakness in conventional metrics forces a change in the game itself. The deployment of unconventional force, from weaponizing energy flows to explicit nuclear posturing, is a mathematical function of this insolvency. It is a desperate but calculated liquidity event. The state converts the liability of an unpopular war into the asset of existential leverage. By threatening a wider, asymmetric escalation, it forces adversaries to the negotiating table, not to discuss the facts on the ground, but to negotiate the price of de-escalating a global threat. The solvency crisis is averted by making the world a co-signer on its debt. The central calculation of modern conflict is no longer firepower, it is financial solvency. The protocol for a state facing systemic crisis is to convert economic weakness directly into a kinetic liability. The entire equation has been inverted. This conversion has a clear mathematical formula. Analysis from the Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI, quantifies the shift. A legacy kinetic asset, a main battle tank, costs approximately $5 million. The asymmetric tool capable of neutralizing it, a modified FPV drone, can cost as little as $500. This is a 10,000 to 1 kinetic cost disparity. This is the democratization of violence. The barrier to entry for projecting strategic force has been effectively deleted. Economic weakness is no longer a constraint on launching an attack. It is a primary accelerant for adopting asymmetric, high-lethality protocols. A solvency crisis is now a launch-on-warning condition for unconventional escalation. The alerts issued for regional instability, from South Africa to Canada, are not the story. They are a deliberate misdirection. These locations are being engineered into proxy laboratories, low-cost, deniable staging grounds for a far more dangerous protocol. They are symptoms of a systemic disease originating within the core of supposedly stable powers. While legacy media focuses on local unrest, they ignore the mathematical certainty driving it. According to RUSI and CSIS analysis, these gray zones are where states with declining conventional leverage field test asymmetric weapons. This is not theory, it is observable strategy. The primary accelerant is systemic fragility at the highest levels. In China, President Xi's closest military ally, General Zhang Yuxia, is under investigation for allegedly leaking nuclear secrets, according to reports sourced from the Russian Presidential and Information Office. This is not a simple corruption purge. It is a symptom of extreme internal paranoia, a precursor to external aggression. Simultaneously, Japan faces a currency solvency crisis, with markets on high alert for intervention to prop up the yen. In Lebanon, the government's collapse signifies geopolitical impotence, creating a power vacuum. These are not separate crises. They are data points illustrating a loss of traditional power vectors. A state facing a solvency crisis, political, financial, or military, does not passively collapse. It is mathematically driven to convert its weakness into a kinetic or existential liability for its rivals. The gray zone is the laboratory for this conversion. Here they test financial shocks, cyber warfare protocols, and destabilization tactics at a low kinetic cost before deploying them at scale. The regional instability is not the fire, it is the fire alarm. A nuclear launch is not triggered by a missile, it is triggered by a loss of data. A single targeted cyber attack blinding a nation's early warning system forces a mathematical choice: launch on suspicion or risk total systemic annihilation. The commander is forced to launch out of fear. This is the fog of digital war. According to strategic analysts at CSIS, the launch-on-warning doctrine is a response protocol to credible data indicating an inbound nuclear strike. The objective is to launch a full retaliatory strike before your own arsenal is destroyed on the ground. The systemic liability is the word data. If an adversary can blind your early warning network, they create an impossible dilemma. The commander no longer knows if the blank radar screen is a system error or the silent prelude to a decapitation strike. The kinetic cost of waiting is perceived as infinite. This is not a theoretical risk. Reports, originating from the Russian Presidential and Information Office, state that China's top general, Zhang Yuxia, second only to Xi Jinping, is under investigation. The accusation, leaking nuclear weapons program secrets to the United States. Such a high-level purge signals profound fragility within a nuclear command structure. When internal trust collapses, the system defaults to its most aggressive, automated protocols. The human element of de-escalation is removed from the equation. In a state destabilized by internal purges, the mathematical incentive is to assume the worst-case scenario. Economic weakness and political paranoia are converted directly into a lower threshold for launch. The primary vector for escalation is a targeted cyber attack on a rival's nuclear command and control. The transition from systemic fragility to asymmetric escalation is not a debate, it is a protocol. Analysis based on high-level purges within China's Central Military Commission, source, Russian Presidential and Information Office, and Japan's currency solvency crisis. Source: Yahoo Finance, indicates a mathematical certainty. States perceiving a loss of conventional leverage will convert economic weakness into a kinetic liability. The first expression will not be a missile. It will be a calibration shot, an attribution impossible event designed to test Western response protocols and inflict maximum economic cost with minimum physical footprint, a core doctrine of asymmetric escalation analyzed by CSIS. Within the next 12 months, expect a 48 to 72-hour shutdown of the primary digital logistics network of a Tier 1 U.S. West Coast container port. The event will be publicly attributed to a catastrophic server farm malfunction or a cascading switch failure, not a state-sponsored cyber attack. The objective is to measure the kinetic cost of a digital blockade and to signal a new launch-on-warning posture for economic warfare. It is the calculated act of a regime that views the alleged leaking of its own nuclear secrets as a terminal symptom, for which the only antidote is to demonstrate a new, more dangerous form of leverage.